Heard from Barry Trotz earlier in the week, as well as the Terps and Bino Ranson. And heading into the weekend, we got the Fish coming to town on a 6-game run, and the Ravens, of course, a piece of first place. A fun December ahead. Let's talk some football right now. Get out to St. Louis, one of my favorite towns that I had a wonderful 1-hour flight delay at the St. Louis Lambert Airport en route to Dallas 2 weeks ago. He covers all things NFL and a longtime Hall of Fame voter at BalzerFootball.com, as well as Off Times on Sirius Radio. We welcome Howard Balzer back into the program. You can follow his journey, as thousands do, on Twitter at HBalzer721. What's going on, Howard? How's life in the big city out there in St. Louis?
Oh, it's good, good, Nestor. We've almost made it through an entire NFL season without too many problems. Although there is kind of an outward glee every time the Rams lose.
Oh, I'm familiar with that, man. I'm familiar with that.
And then when a controversy creeps up, like when Eric Dickerson comes out and says that the head coach Jeff Fisher called him and told him he's not welcome on the sideline because players are uncomfortable, and now things are blowing up in L.A. We just sit here and go, "Yep, SOS." Same old. Sorry,
what is that?
Rams.
What's the thing with Dickerson? Why do you want to piss off Dickerson in L.A.? What are you doing? Like, what's the point?
Well, it's interesting because a little of the background before this even happened was that he was supposed to be on their radio team. And it was announced that he was going to be doing the analysis on their radio broadcast, and then suddenly he wasn't. And no one ever really talked about it, but the word I got is that they were trying, at least in his mind, they were lowballing him on a contract, and so he didn't want to do it, and they weren't able to reach an agreement. Well, then he got a gig with another radio station in L.A., where he comes on, talks football, and talks the Rams, and he's been very outspoken and honest about the football team. Well,
that's not going to work. You're not allowed to be honest and outspoken, right?
Of course not. Of course not. And so then, it was strange to me because I saw that when the Rams went to London to play the Giants in October, I knew they had invited Orlando Pace because Orlando had told me that he was invited to it. And obviously they were trying to curry favor with him and wanted to make sure that he didn't speak out against them because, of course, he played his whole career with the Rams in St. Louis. And so they brought him to London. Well, then I saw a picture or a video from London that had Orlando there with Kevin Green, who also went into the Hall of Fame this year. I found that odd for this reason, because Kevin Green started his career with the Rams. He played I think it was either 7 or 8 seasons with the Rams, then moved on to several teams and played 3 seasons with the Steelers and then with the Panthers and then finished up with the 49ers. Well, he only played 2 or 3 seasons with the Steelers. And yet when the Hall of Fame asked Kevin Green, where do you want to get your Hall of Fame ring, at what game this year, or what team's game, he picked the Steelers instead of the Rams. So I found it odd that the Rams had invited him to London. Again, maybe that was to try to make up to him or whatever they felt.
Well, you're always trying to make nice with your Hall of Famers. I mean, certainly when the Ravens came here, the first thing they did was reach out to all the old Colts,
Sure. And so nothing wrong with that. But here was the interesting thing. When I then did some asking around about it and found out that they had originally invited Dickerson to London and then disinvited him to go to make the trip with them.
Alanis Morissette wrote about that, uninvited, right?
Yeah, there we go. So now we come to the current story, which apparently occurred as Dickerson talked about in a radio interview on Fox Radio, that he called the Rams and asked for a sideline pass because a couple of his friends wanted to go to a game. He hadn't been on the sideline apparently, and that's what he says. He then got a call from Jeff Fisher last week saying to him that he's not welcome on the sideline for games because players would be uncomfortable with his presence because of his criticism of the team. So that's essentially in nuts and bolts the story. It's blowing up in L.A. now that it has gotten out. And he was very critical in his interview, went on for about 15 minutes, where he said, Nestor, that as long as Jeff Fisher is the head coach, I will not even go to a Rams game, much less be on the sideline. So very, very intriguing, because here's a team that's now 4-7, which is their normal spot under Jeff Fisher. He is in the last year of his contract, and no one, I shouldn't say no one.
So what you're saying is Dickerson's going to take the month off, is what he's going to.
But everyone wonders, is he going to be back? There's the belief that he's actually already signed an extension of the contract, but they don't want to announce it because that would even look worse because of the way the team is performing, and they'll have to deal with that in the off season. Keeping in mind, Nestor, that I know their original plan, and I'm wondering if they're going to stick with this now. Their original plan was next February or March to begin marketing and putting on sale the PSLs for the new stadium, which will open in 2019. Well, I can just imagine how pricey those are going to be, and will they then delay bringing that out, knowing what the reaction would be to what the cost is for a once again mediocre football team with a head coach that many people are questioning. So it's going to be an interesting story to continue to watch as this season ends and then we get into the off season.
So, Howard, before I get to the Ravens and the Dolphins, I got to tell you a little anecdote, because no one gives better anecdotes than you, by the way. I was flying to Dallas, and I had to go through St. Louis. First off, I got Ted Drews out of the freezer there at the Lambert Airport, and I just wanted to say thank you to you for that. Secondly, I land in Dallas, and I get to the stadium, and I get there kind of early, up in that big monstrosity, and I'm up there in the press lounge, and I'm having a meal. Goose Goslin's on one side, and Charlene's on the other side, and all the people that cover the Cowboys. And Gil Brandt is strolling through there, and he had nowhere to sit. And I thought, you know what, Gil, will you sit with me? And Gil sat with me for an hour. And there's only one thing better than going to Dallas and watching football. It's going to Dallas and watching football and getting to sit with Gil Brandt for an hour. And I know how much he loves you, so I just wanted to give you that story.
That's a good one. It reminded me of a story, and I'll never forget this one. I think it was 1983, and I was at a USFL championship game, and I'm trying to remember where it was. I guess that was the first year of the league. The game might have been, I think it was between the Oakland Invaders and the Michigan Panthers, and I believe it might have been in Tampa. But anyway, it doesn't even matter where it was. But I'm in the press box, and who sits down next to me in the press box was Sid Gilman.
There you go.
The great offensive coach, obviously, from whose offense has spawned, Norv Turner and Mike Martz and many, many, great assistants and head coaches in the league. So anyway, he sits down, I introduce myself, and the game begins. Nestor, for 3 hours, I got just an amazing education of football, because there he is, he's talking out loud, and as the players are coming out for a play, he's calling what the play is going to be, what the formation, here's the tendencies. Boy, it was just unbelievable to listen to a guy who watches, obviously, football a whole lot different than most of us. And as a coach and as a guy who just knows it and studies it and has watched millions of hours of tape. So never forget that. And I don't remember a lot of the football that he taught me in that 3 hours, but boy, it was unbelievable.
My dad's been gone 24 years now, and I don't have a lot of moments where I'm like, hey, my dad would think that's cool. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't. I don't think about it like that. But as I'm sitting there and Gil Brandt looks up to me and, he's eating his bread and his salad, and I've known Gil for 20 years and, had him on the show back when I was at Sporting News, those many years ago when you and I got together many years ago. But sitting there in Dallas, in that monstrosity, realizing I'm having a meal with a guy here that he worked with Tom Landry every day, I thought, pretty good day in Dallas so far. And then the game started, and then the Ravens couldn't stop the run. And thoughts about the Ravens right now and the Dolphins? This is a really interesting football game this week, Howard.
It is. It really is. And there's a bunch of teams right now that are obviously fighting for their playoff lives, and Miami is one of them. And they know that it's going to have to be a wild card for them to get in, most likely, unless New England would somehow collapse in the last 5 weeks of the season. But they've had a great turnaround after they were 1-4 and have won 6 in a row or 7-4.
Yep.
And so they've got themselves in pretty good position. Obviously, there's a bunch of football to be played, and the AFC West has 3 teams that are in the hunt, but obviously a huge game for Miami. And with your guys' division, it's probably going to be division winner, and that's it, from a division that at times has had 3 teams in the postseason because it's been so strong. This year it hasn't been. You got the Steelers and the Ravens right there just muddling around 500. But if one of them can put on a run at the end of the season, then they'll be the division winner. If none of them can put on a run, then it's probably going to go down to the wire, and it makes it very intriguing to see how it's going to end up with teams that certainly have warts, but certainly have the ability to win close games. And the Ravens have won more close ones this year than last year, obviously, and so it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. I think most people think that the Steelers have a slight edge, but with the defensive questions that they have, who knows? I mean, that's what makes the NFL fun and interesting. And it's going to be, like you said, a very interesting December all around the NFL.
Howard, it's what I learned after I know everything. And 21 years into the team being here, the last 2 years have really taught me a lot. First off, how fortunate we've been to have a good team, and a team that has John Ogden didn't get injured much. Ray Lewis didn't get injured much. Ed Reed didn't get injured much. We never had a quarterback, but our best players tended to play 13, 14, 15, 16 games a year. These last 2 years, playing with older players, guys getting injured, losing the quarterback last year, after all the prosperity, I saw it in the month of October, and the Ravens started the year 4-0. Look, it was a soft 4-0. I'm not going to portray that beating Jacksonville or Buffalo or Cleveland, earns you much. But once they lost Suggs, Yanda, Smith, Mosley, the other Smith, guys are Stanley, all these guys were hurt all at the same time during that period when they went up to the Meadowlands back-to-back weeks in October, and there is no replacing those guys. I know Brian Billick wrote the book Next Man Up. I've been giving him a hard time. There's no next man up. You can bring somebody in, but when you lose your $10 million players, when Elvis Dumerville's not on the field and Terrell Suggs isn't on the field, you're not going to have a pass rush unless you're incredibly fortunate with 5th and 6th round draft picks, and certainly not the kind of consistent thing that we've had around here. And the Ravens, as they've gotten these guys back, Yanda's playing with one shoulder. Suggs is playing with one arm right now. But they're a lot better with those guys in there. And that's why I think they have a chance, because they have looked better with their full complement of players.
There's no doubt about it. I've always thought the whole next man up thing is somewhat of a fraud. Obviously, there has to be a next man up. But most of the time, the reality is the next man up is someone who wasn't good enough to start. Now, sometimes you hit lightning in the bottle, and it's a guy that flourishes.
Dak Prescott, like that.
Right. And you can get by with it. But that's not the norm. It's not usual. And if you have too many injuries, there's no way to have as many changes as there are, and then do it. And especially, you mentioned Yanda, especially on the offensive line. There was that period there where he was out, Ronnie Stanley was out, I think Wagner was banged up. And so when you have those issues on the offensive line, it's just really difficult to get anything going offensively. And Miami's a perfect example. I mean, they were somewhat fortunate to win this game that they played this past week because the offense just wasn't as good, but against San Francisco as you would have thought. It would have been. But they've early in the season they had injuries on the offensive line. Pouncey was out. Brandon Albert was out. Then those guys came back, and all of a sudden Jay Ajayi is going for 200 yards a game rushing, and they've got some continuity on the offensive line, and they start playing really well. Well, this past Sunday, Pouncey was out again.
Tunsil was playing tackle and hurt, right? Yeah.
And Tunsil didn't play, and Albert didn't play, got injured again. So you're playing without 3 starters on the offensive line. That's untenable. And so when you have those multiple injuries, it's an issue. It's a problem. But coaches have to say that, Nestor. Obviously they can't come out because then everyone just labels them as excuse makers.
Yeah, how's Marvin going to say, I can't win without Green, and losing a running back last week? I mean, look at Houston without J.J. Watt. I mean, there's a reason he's on all the covers of all the games and doing all the commercials. He's really good, and when you take him out, you can't replace him. You just can't.
Right. Right. It's up to us in the media, the observers, to point it out. And whatever the coach says is great because that's the way they have to play it publicly. But it's up to us to talk about the reality. Now, we get labeled excuse makers, and I you don't know how many times I was labeled that over the years with the Rams, but it didn't bother me because those are people who don't want to, they don't want to know reasons. They just want to be able to just, criticize. But I would often say, hey, look, I'm not saying this about only the Rams at that particular time. I'm saying it about other teams. In other situations.
Hey, well, let's go see how the Patriots, if they don't have Gronkowski in January, let's see them get to the Super Bowl. Let's go see them win 2 games without him against good teams. Any key player, this is going to happen. I mean, the Steelers are nothing without Roethlisberger. We know that, and even a gimpier version. But then there have been some teams this year where, Carolina, Arizona, Green Bay, despite Monday night. The sort of the falling of grace of these teams that have a quarterback but don't have everything else.
No, that's exactly right. And the Packers, what they were able to get done Monday night was, and it was funny hearing so many people say, oh, Aaron Rodgers, he's back. So they scored 24 points. It wasn't like they exploded, but they only gave up 13. After having given up, believe it or not, 153 points in the previous 4 games. But they got some of their defensive guys back, and there have been some weeks, they played without Sam Shields, one of their better corners, for a long time, and he's now on IR. They had injuries throughout that defense. So, yeah, that's the equalizer in the NFL is the injury factor. And most, like I said, sometimes you can overcome it in certain situations. But if you have too many of them, there's just no way.
All right, man. You and I get together at owners' meetings and combines and Super Bowls and all that stuff. We see what these owners have done to the sport over the last 15 years, the cash grab, the growth and all that. And by the way, the Ravens might wind up playing in London next year. But Thursday Night Football, I'm sort of shocked, and I haven't done a lot of reading on this because it's sort of a fresh story earlier this week. I can't imagine they're going to do away with it now that they've got it unless they're going to get the 18 games that they eventually want to get out of the players. I don't – tell me how this works that they're going to get rid of – everyone hates Thursday Night Football. That's the reason to get rid of it. The players hate it. The coaches hate it. Fans hate it. But they're making a lot of money off of it, Howard.
No, that's exactly right. And, let's look at the way this all developed. Obviously, they always had some Thursday games on Thanksgiving. But then when NFL Network came along, they said, oh, this will be a good way to really get exposure to our network, and it'll give cable carriers reason to pick it up. Because let's remember, there was a lot of issues in the beginning of cable companies not wanting to put on NFL Network. So they figured, well, if we put on a game, then a week, or at least for part of the season, that'll give motivation for cable companies to pick it up. So in the beginning, it was like the second half of the season. Then little by little, they added to it. And then they brought in CBS. Last year, I guess it was. Maybe it was the year before. Then this year, they split it between CBS and NBC to get them to pay more. So yeah, it's a total, absolute money grab. And they would always cite, well, there's no evidence of injuries. Well, just because a guy doesn't get injured on Thursday night doesn't mean that the quick turnaround and all of that doesn't lead to
there's evidence of bad football, right?
that's the big thing.
If I go see Springsteen and he decides to play 7 nights in a row, you don't want to see him on the 7th night. You know what I mean?
No, that's exactly it. It's the combination of lack of quality, which is also because they put on every team, and so you're dealing with a lot of teams that aren't very good. But just think of it. You've talked to players. We've all talked to players. To a man, they all say they don't even begin to feel human after a Sunday game until Wednesday. And now, so you can't even really practice. These teams have walkthroughs on Monday and Tuesday before the game. and then maybe a quick walk through Wednesday. Let's remember the team on the road have to travel Wednesday.
You know what's
and
really weird, Howard? Last week before Thanksgiving, the Ravens played in Dallas at 1 o'clock. And I thought to myself, why is this a 1 o'clock game? And I'm like, well, Dallas has to come back and play at lunchtime on Thursday. And then I get on the plane on the way home, and I realize the Redskins are playing the late game, and they're the team that has to get on the road and go to Dallas and play on Thursday.
Right.
And I thought to myself, what are you doing? I mean, did you have to put the Redskins on Sunday Night Football that week? I mean, that's kind of insane. Not that I have any love lost for the Redskins, but whoever travels, it's not fair. It's just not fair.
Exactly. You're absolutely 100% right. And so I don't believe they'll get rid of it, but they realize they have to do something. And whether that is, here's the problem. If you don't put every team on, well, then you're going to have teams doing it multiple times during the year, which isn't fair either. So I think the only real answer, the only real fair thing, is that any teams playing on Thursday night have to be off the previous Sunday. And the issue there you could get into, though, is at the end of the season, does that mean that you're going to have a team with a bye, let's say in week 16? Because they're then playing on Thursday. Well, of course, I shouldn't say that because there's no Thursday night, the final game of the final week of the regular season. So let's say week 15, a potential, playoff situation. You're going to have a team sitting on the sideline and doesn't play because they have a Thursday night game in week 16. Does that work? I don't know. It might be better than the alternative. And so I think that's something they have to look at. It would mean having a bye almost every week of the season, but they have them almost every week of the season now. It would only be a couple of extra weeks that they would have teams with byes. So, but they have to do something. I think it's going to be interesting to see what it is they do.
Howard, it's been a big story here this week that we've finally, after 21 years, start to see empty seats, starting to see $20 tickets on StubHub for a first-place team. I think this is not necessarily a Baltimore phenomenon. I don't necessarily believe that it's financially driven or, we're in some sort of a financial depression around here. I sort of lived through that in 8, 9, and 10 where people didn't have money and still went to the games and drove ticket prices up. But the bloom is a little off here, and we're talking about it here and, in a place where we lost the Colts, and for most of the kids that go to these games, they have no recollection of 33 years ago at all. But, it's all fresh to you there in St. Louis, and I'm sure you remember the team leaving the first time, the Jim Hart era, the Cardinals, and then starting to see the cracks of empty seats after Kurt Warner and thought, well, that's not a good thing, right? I mean, it's I said to myself, I wonder what it's going to look like 5 years from now. I'm just wondering out loud.
I think we all do. And obviously there are many, many different factors involved in it. So it's never possible to put your finger on one and say, this is what it's all about. Just like with all the stories, throughout the first half of the season about falling TV ratings. But it's all of the above. The one thing that I also think is a part of it, Nestor, and you mentioned losing a football team, but I haven't seen the national media talk about falling ratings and maybe a little bit of a lack of interest that it's traced to people just disgusted with the way the NFL does business because they see it all the time, whether it's treating cities like crap, like they did last year with St. Louis, San Diego, and Oakland, and now San Diego and Oakland going through it again, a lame duck season this year. You see the way the commissioner did it, and what's funny? I think there's a lot of people who weren't disappointed that Tom Brady was suspended because there's a lot of people that don't like the Patriots. However, I'll bet a lot of those people, though, still say, this was insane. Are you serious? Suspending a guy 4 games for allegedly deflating a football when there was no real evidence that he had anything to do with it. And so you see all these things, and I think there's just a certain amount of people that get turned off by it. And how much that, as a part of the ratings, who knows? It's tough to really quantify. But I think everything together is something that the NFL has to look at and worry about.
Well, the one thing is they
remember,
need the games to be good, right? I mean, 2 weeks ago we
yeah,
talked
that's a
about the
big part.
Seattle-New England game, the Pittsburgh-Dallas game. That was great. It was an incredible Sunday of football. The Ravens have been in a lot of exciting games this year, quite frankly. And, I mean, you talk about the end of the San Francisco-Miami game. It can't get any more exciting than that. But all that being said, there are a lot of weeks and a lot of games, a lot of Thursday night games where it's just awful. And when it's awful, nobody wants to watch awful of anything, quite frankly.
Exactly. And when the game's out of hand. And here's an interesting aspect of that, Nestor, because they still have in the back of their mind about expanding the regular season. And don't they realize that would just add some more awful football to it? And that teams that aren't good, that are, now are looking at finishing a season, 3-13 or 4-12 or whatever, now might be 4-14, or 3-15.
But as a guy that's bought preseason tickets for 21 years now, Howard, honestly, I mean, I would shudder to think at how much real money I've spent on preseason football in the 21 years, because I don't think I've ever sold a ticket for more than $1, that I didn't use. I'd rather have two of those games mean something, or one of the two that I buy tickets for, I should say.
I don't quarrel with that aspect of it, but the flip side is adding more lack of quality games. And if your goal is really, and here's the thing, the NFL talks out of both sides of its mouth on player safety. And I wrote about that on all22.com last week. They talk out of both sides of their mouth. Oh, player safety. But then they have these Thursday games. They talk about expanding the regular season. If player safety is the issue, you don't even think about doing those things. And then let's talk about the competitive aspect. We've had two instances this year with Carson Palmer in Arizona, and then last week, Andrew Luck in Indianapolis, where they happen to have Thursday games after suffering a concussion the previous week. That had a competitive issue, because if the game was on Sunday, they probably would have been cleared in time to play. But because the game was on Thursday, they couldn't be. And the Colts are fighting for first place in the division, and they went in empty, with not that many bullets in the barrel, because Scott Tolzien had to play quarterback against the Steelers instead of Andrew Luck. And so when it starts affecting games as well, and everything does when you have injuries and guys can't play, and if guys are playing on Thursday that aren't totally healthy and haven't recovered enough, that affects winning and losing. And so that's what the NFL truly has to look at. And at some point, Nestor, make a decision that's based on the football and not the business. But the NFL is it's always been about the business, but it just seems pushing it more and more, because Roger Goodell, he said it, he's hell-bent on getting to $25 billion in revenue a year in this league. And what do you have to do to yourself to make that happen? I think that's a real issue and a real concern.
He is H. Balzer721 out on Twitter, and Howard Balzer at all22.com, as well as on NFL Sirius XM Radio from time to time. Howard, I love having you on, man. It's always great to talk football with you. Time passes quickly when we get together. Next time we get together, Ted Drews will be involved.
Always important that is the case, Nestor.
A summertime and a Cardinals game. I see it from here. Great having you on, Howard. We'll see you soon.
All right, take care, man.
You got it. Howard Balzer, one of my favorites out in the great city of St. Louis, Missouri, as they like to say. You can find me out in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. If you miss anything here at all, download, podcast, listen when you want, where you want, how you want. It's the way we do things in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault. Morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That is powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life, and we are delivering that every morning to you, courtesy of our friends at Planet Fitness. Last but never least, breaking news, and hopefully some good news from the Ravens and Jimmy Smith before the weekend when the Fish get here. It happens first on the WNST text service. All breaking news first, never spam. Always brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Don't forget Dennis Colazzos here this Thursday and every Thursday, driving you home and getting you ready for the weekend. Don't forget Wednesday night, Zach Orr and Anthony Levine at Christopher Daniel and Timonium will be swabbing for the Bone Marrow Registry and DKMS. And There Goes My Hero on Wednesday, as well as Thursday with Dennis Pitta Pitta at Greenmount Station up in Hampstead. I'll be having some crab cakes up there, fried, of course, and a lovely holiday drive north into Carroll County. Thursday night, Dennis Pitta at Greenmount Station. Wednesday night, Zach Orr and Anthony Levine at Christopher Daniel. I'm Nestor. This is WNST.net, AM 1570 in WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports